Okey, Assalamualaikum dan selamat petang kepada semua. Terlebih dahulu saya ingin memohon maaf atas masalah yang kita hadapi tadi. So I can see that Mr. Ahmad already with us. Mr. Ahmad, okay. So perkenalkan, ini Encik Ahmad Osman Amrul As bin Muhammad Ripin, our special guest for our talk today. So maybe let me introduce Encik Ahmad properly. Okay. Encik Ahmad currently is a Deputy Director of Monetary Policy Department, Bank Negara Malaysia. Right, and then he obtained his degree from University of Wisconsin, Madison, USA. He did Bachelor of Science in Economics and International Studies, and then he pursued his Master Science in Economics, specialization in Economic Development at University of Glasgow, United Kingdom, and the title of his dissertation is The Impact of FDI on Wage Inequality in the Malaysian Manufacturing Sector. So Encik Ahmad today will talk about the quantitative methods for policy for monetary policy. So without further ado, I pass the floor to you, Encik Ahmad.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, but then could you please, the voice sound quite low.
Dengar tak?
Hello? Yang lain okey ke? Respond please.
Okay.
Okay, Doctor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dr. Siti, for inviting me for this talk, and thanks for everyone for joining in. I'm gonna spend like maybe an hour to talk about what the presentation that I had here, quantitative methods on monetary policy. So maybe about half an hour going through the slides, and maybe we can open up to questions and answers, if you will. So let me start off with introduction of MP. So just a little bit background. So I've been with the Monetary Policy Department since 2016, right? So given the circumstances that we had, for the last couple of years, so MP has become a bit more important, I suppose, for the average people, even in Malaysia, and certainly globally as well. So this is why I think it's good to sort of like share what we are thinking at the central bank, and maybe share a bit what other central banks throughout the world is doing at the moment, given the circumstances, the economic circumstances that we're facing, right? So I want to start with the slide that's flashed at the moment, monetary stability. So when we talk about monetary policy, right? So the objective is really for central bank is monetary stability. So if you can look at the slide on the left hand side, so this is Bank Negara, right? So our act says that there's two basically objectives that we pursue. One is the monetary stability that I've just said, and the other one is the financial stability. So this is financial policy, talking about the banks, the banking system, the financial sector, and overall, right? So monetary stability ni, what are we thinking about monetary stability? Apa sebenarnya monetary stability? So it's simple. Monetary stability ni, when you achieve monetary stability, when you have sustainable prices and stable prices and sustainable growth, right? So when we think about stable prices, so price stability, as what perhaps you folks are learning in school, is that when we want to see, we're basically talking about inflation, right? So inflation is basically the rate of increase in prices. Okay, it's not the price level, bukan harga barang, changes in harga barang, which is kept low and stable over extended time. So if you think about an inflation targeter, which Malaysia is not, I have to put a caveat up front. We're talking about 2% rate of increase, change lah, growth of CPI consumer price index over time, right? So every year naik 2%, 2%, 2%. So what does that mean? So prices are increasing over time. So we don't want prices to drop, right? But the rate of increase is stable, predictable, and it's not orang kata harming the economy, right? So that's what we mean by price stability or stable prices, right? So at the end of the day, why do high inflation is a big no for central banks and an economy in the world? Because you guys probably have known this, but I'm just going to reiterate here quickly: is that it reduces purchasing power, right? So we're talking about less ability to buy goods and services because harga barang mahal, harga changes of harga barang sentiasa naik, income doesn't keep pace with the rising prices, and that reduces purchasing power. Right. The other one is the value of savings. Um, um, you know, this is not just for retirees. I think everyone of working age have some sort of savings, right? So basically, when you have high inflation, when you lose purchasing power over time, what you're going to get is that purchasing power, you punya savings pun worth less in the future, right? And satu lagi yang tadi ada cakap lah, it lowers the real income. So income yang you dapat contoh 100, tapi inflation is 10%, right? So you deduct RM10 daripada tu. That's basic RM90 saja yang you can actually spend, right? So as illustrated in the slide, I mean, this is quite conventional or rather quite, everyone knows this, right? So the value of ringgit over time based on baskets of goods in groceries when you cart has reduced, right? Okay. So next slide, please. So that's basically talking about inflation. That's the target. That's what we want to achieve. So a little bit of context in the current environment that we have, right? So kalau kita tengok on the left hand side, this is high. Inflation is not just in Malaysia; it's pretty much everywhere in the world. I mean, we're quite lucky in the sense that kalau kita tengok kat situ lah, kita punya rate of inflation not as bad as others, right? Okay, so it's still high. I wouldn't say it's low by standards, but it's nothing compared what advanced economies or some other countries in the world. Partly because of subsidies. Look at Malaysia, the few subsidies, other price controls on food. So that's the main reason why inflation has not gone up significantly as others, right? So when you have high inflation, so the remedy conventionally is basically monetary policy needs to do something, right? So monetary policy here we're talking about raising interest rates. Right? As you can see in that map, pretty much merah maksudnya tightening lah. People have increased the interest rate since the crisis. Biru tu basically easing. So of course there are outliers there. Russia, as you guys know, in a war, so they can afford to reduce interest rates. But pretty much everyone in the world is going to red, meaning the interest rate is going up compared to what it was 2-3 years ago. And I guess another point to raise is that it's the environment that we're at the moment is quite complex. Okay, inflation is high. At the same time, juga you have strong US dollar because the Fed is hiking like crazy, right? So what that means that for the rest of us is that you guys would have seen ringgit has depreciated lah, to a very low level that we haven't seen in what decade perhaps, right? So that's bound to have an effect on inflation. You got through imported inflation, and I think more simplistic is that it raises cost of living because imported products or food or whatever is more expensive now than it used to be before, right? And of course, the military conflict in Ukraine is still prevailing. That means that that could create problems in terms of supply shortages. Barang-barang tak boleh buat because of the war. What we saw last year, right? Could also affect commodity prices should the conflict escalate. So high global oil prices going back up high. And the 3-1 is basically quite, I would say, unique to the pandemic, right? Because of MCOs, restrictions, health restrictions, and whatnot. You get to see things that you have not, we're not saying before. Foreign workers tak cukup macam kat Malaysia because they can't come, they balik, they tak boleh masuk balik, right? Revenge spending, people save a lot of money during pandemic to do anything they spend. This is quite prominent in the US, and of course the gig economy itself blooms like crazy, right? So people tak boleh keluar rumah, so they order from food panda, Grab, and all sorts of things. So that's bound to have in economics we call that frictions because it kind of like change the dynamics on how things work, right? And clearly there's also climate events. Let's not forget about this. It's especially in Malaysia, right? Hujan, banjir, and whatnot. It's becoming more prominent and more frequent, and that's bound to affect food supply and whatnot. Of course, livelihoods as well. And the fifth one is the risk going forward in the sense that because of the hikes, because of the inflation, the outlook in global growth is not as rosy as what people see there. So when the world sneezes, then of course a country like us, highly trading nation, rely quite a lot on exports and imports to some extent. We could be affected as well, right? So monetary policy is not orang kata this time around. It's not as straightforward as it used to be. So economy is recovering. Inflation's high. Let's just hike. It's more than that, right? Next slide, please. So I want to bring attention to the recent move, Bank Negara punya move for the last maybe 7-8 months, right? So what we can see here on inflation is that clearly there is an uptrend in inflation. Okay. Number one is because of high commodity prices lah. Kita tahu oil price naik. Walaupun minyak dikekang, ada price control, but the fact that that's only for retail, for folks like us, the businesses, they pay full price. So if global oil price is 100, so they're paying that full amount, market price. So that bound to they're bound to push the cost to consumers, right? So it's not just oil, pretty much all commodities in the world is going up. So that's bound to have an effect on inflation as well. Okay. Primarily through headline inflation. But core inflation, underlying inflation, is something interesting in the sense that because kita nampak dia naik steeply itu is partly because of the demand is recovering as well. So economy is recovering, economy is open, people makan kat luar, And I should say there's one category in the CPI. It's called food away from home. Quite a basket, quite substantial at I think about 50%. That has gone up quite a lot, 4 to 5%. Partly reflecting because, as what I said, people are the demand is coming. We are eating outside, so prices naturally go up, right? So if you think about monetary policy, it's not really to address supply shock macam cakap tadi, harga minyak, harga barang naik because commodities naik. No. It's really to address this rising demand pressures, right? So we want to be preemptive. We don't want to leave it to the last leg and then have to play the catch-up game. So what I mean by catch-up game is what you guys probably have read or heard, like macam kat US, right? So they are slow to react because they want the economy to recover, but the price is that inflation goes beyond control. So what they have to do is that what they have to do and continue to do is that they have to have rates quite a lot, right? They put the 0% now up to 3% in just probably less than a year. So we want to avoid that in Malaysia's case. We want to manage it early, right? So we want to manage it early so that it's well within control, and then the economy itself, not being introduced to this shock coming from the policy rates increase itself. So just a little diagram. How do monetary policy work? So macam I cakap tadi, when the economy recovers, we open up the borders, we open up to basically no MCOs, no lockdowns, no restrictions. So you're going to see demand improving, right? So kita naikkan OPR. What it does is that it wants to slow the pace of demand. So how do you do that? What you do is that because the higher interest rates basically discourages people from borrowing, right? So you want to save more than you spend, and obviously you get you spend less, and demand increases. And when economic activities slow a bit, that's where the price of money, which is inflation, goes down a bit. I want to put on the record here, we're not trying to say that people shouldn't spend whatever, but as an overall for the economy is that when everybody does that at a very fast pace, well, something has to give, right? And that's inflation. So if we want inflation to be within control, that growth of spending needs to moderate at some point in time, right? Of course, when kita tak adalah macam nak kata overheating ke tak, macam say US ke, some other countries. But we don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. Slide, please. So that's basically some primer or some introductions on MP and how how we think it at the central bank. Sorry, Dr. Siti, should I take questions now or should I?
It's up to you, Chairman. It's up to you.
Okay. Feel free to raise hands or whatever if you guys want clarifications, questions, or whatever. We don't have to leave it at the end. Okay. So let's go into the analytics punya part, right? So I was informed. Students here are basically having a bit more of the quantitative punya aspects being exposed, right? So it's more like a minor in math, this kind of stuff. So what I want to share here is really the in practice, how do we use this sort of like skills and how do you see it in practice, right? Okay, number one, let me go straight to inflation, right? So when we think about inflation, right? So if you think about statistics or basically how you scale variables, there's different ways to do that, right? Conventionally, inflation is expressed as year on year, changes year on year. Contoh, Oktober tahun ni 22 compare dengan price level tahun lepas. And then you take the growth of that, and then that's your get, right? That's how DOSM, Department of Statistics, publish data, right? But there's also another aspect of it, which is month on month. So basically, you take the change, and October versus September 2022. So you get some growth numbers as well, right? So why does this matter for monetary policy or policy in general, right? So the first one measures really is how do you see inflation over a time period, right? Because bila you pakai year on year ni, you akan basically solve a few problems. Contohnya seasonality, kan? Contoh barang-barang makanan musim terkujur. So you're gonna smooth that with year on year. So you get some sort of stable indicator. Oh, where's inflation going? As you guys can see here, right? With the year on year, you see that there's an increase in inflation rate over the course of the year, and kind of tapers there, right? But what you want to use on month, right, is really to look at momentum. So you want to see to what extent is the strength of price change in prices manifesting in it, right? So these could have different policy implications juga. So contoh, for example, if you want to assess how strong is inflation, well, if you look at it year on year, so you see that it's moderating. But contohnya, when you look at month on month, well, it's not going down. Of course, here it's going down lah. But contoh dia kalau tak naik, then your implication to monetary policy could be very much different. Right? You may not want to ease up a bit because from a year perspective, yes lah, nampak some stabilization, but the momentum is still strong. So you want to manage the momentum. So that's what I meant here in the slide when the insights and the implication, given the way that we scale the variables, can be very much different and lead to different policy responses. Right. Okay. Next. Put here the Fisher equation lah, basically. This is a relationship between nominal dengan real interest rate. Okay. So real interest rate is basically an interest rate that has taken into account inflation or expected inflation, if you will. Right. So when we think about again, here is how we think about basically policy variables here. So you guys look at on the right hand side, say nominal interest rate looks high. Okay. But for whatever reasons, if you have high inflation, then actually your nominal rate, as what you can see in 2021, can actually be negative. Well, so why does this matter for policy or for economics in general? Well, real interest rate is the one that matters eventually, like to household, because negative means that you're going to get an easing there, right? And if you pay that, contohnya, for example, you are servicing a loan or whatever, basically you're basically saving out instead of having to fork out. Okay. When you flip that, contohnya, if you have high interest rate, nominal interest rate, mega, but your inflation is very small, contoh 0%, contoh lah, then your real interest rate is actually betul lah. Then sorry, yeah, no, I'm sorry. Example in the middle though. So when your nominal interest rate is not that high, say about 2%, quite average, but your inflation is actually negative, so you have a deflation. So what does it do is that it actually increases the real interest rate. Kan? Kalau kita tengok equation on the left hand side, so means that even though inflation is negative, doesn't mean that you're saving a lot. In fact, you're being penalized because real interest rates have gone up. So that's how we think about this quantitative effects if you guys want to see in practice. So not all variables are how do you say this can be on the surface without nuances. You need to see the nuances to see what's the real effect, right? Okay, next slide, please. So just a little perspective. I think for us, we do a lot of modeling as well, but I guess what I'm trying to say here is it really reflects the analytical needs. So what do you want to do? Okay. So in central banks, of course, we have different analytical needs that we want. We want forecasting. So these are sorts of models that we use. If you want to use for scenario analysis, impact analysis, you tak nak forecast pun. So you want to use slightly different model which have a bit of macro structure to it. So as far as quite being used rather prominently in central banks and even Bank Negara. But if you want to do policy shocks, contoh lah, for example, you want to see, what if I don't increase OPR? What would happen to inflation and growth? Well, of course, you can use other methods yang kat atas tu, but I mean, in the profession, they have gone through evolution in the sense that DSGE, basically a structured model, a big structural model, is the ones that are more prominent because they boleh incorporate different sort of economic dynamics. So in a way that, if you think about it, kita pakai the hat of general equilibrium lah, rather than partial equilibrium. So you guys will be introduced to different sorts of model, but at the end of the day, what I want to stress really is always ask what does it need what does the model answer? What do you want to prove at? Okay? So that's very important. That's very important, because if you want to say, for example, if you want to be like central banks, you want to do all this sort of things, that you need to have all suites of model, not just one. Okay. And obviously the caveat is that you need to understand the limitation. Contoh, for example, DSG, it can model how economy behaves rather well, but what it can't do is that it can't forecast. It's not a very good model to forecast. Contoh, nak forecast inflation ke, nak forecast growth ke, no, it's not going to do well on that. Right? So you're going to use other things. So understanding the caveats given the needs is very important when we think about modeling. Right. Next. Okay. Just a little snippets on how we do forecasting in BNM. So basically, we follow this is quite standard across central banks. So the new Keynesian Phillips curve punya perspective. So we use this in Negara as well. What it does is it allows us to decompose, right, the determinants of inflation, right, based on the theory. So if you think about it, inflation now is a function of, on the left hand side, lag inflation, right? So why does this matter? Because lag it captures persistence, right? Persistence. So inflation, unlike say other macro variables or other variables, if you will, contoh macam stock market, exchange rate. I mean, they're persistent. So they say, for example, when you have high inflation, you don't expect it overnight or next month when it akan jatuh. No, the inertia is very strong. So you want to be able to capture that in forecasting. And of course, the other one is the mean reverting property lah. So when it goes up, eventually it has to go down as well. Cuma berapa lama itu. So we want to capture that. So the inflation expectations here is trying to capture those properties. Right. Okay. The other two parts, this is a more conventional one lah. So when I talk about demand tadi, so what determines inflation? People spending, kan? So people spending tu, how do we think about it? Right. You want to see from economic lag. So typically, people look at output gap. Contohnya, which is when you measure the performance now, right, in your economy compared to what the potential is. So if there is a positive gap, means that you are still not spending as much as your potential allows you to do so. Okay. So kalau dia negative, means that you're spending way above what the potential sets you in. Right? So that's economic lag. And the other one, these two can be interchangeable, is the labor market conditions. Right? So you want to see what's the growth of wages. So bila I cakap tadi spending, obviously, people spend means that their wages are growing as well. Kan? You can't be spending if you don't see growth in wages. So you want to see that as well. You want to see that could there be problems in labor market, shortages ke? So bila shortages, what happens is that supply and demand punya rule means that, well, if somebody willing to work, then they have to be paid more lah kan. So that's one of the permutation, right? And of course, the supply factors as well. I've mentioned this a lot: commodity prices, fuel, agricultural stuff. That's really, really important for us. Kalau you guys are aware about harga ayam, kan? So the reason why harga ayam naik is because the input cost has gone up. The input cost dia apa? Chicken feed, right? So chicken feed tu dibuat daripada grains, soya lah, corn, those kind of stuff. So that has shot up, and that increases the price of inputs and eventually the product itself, right? And clearly, the other one is exchange rate lah. As I mentioned, I mean, when ringgit is weaker, naturally, the cost of products, imported products or imported inputs goes up, right? So, yeah. So on the right hand side, so this is how we specify our models. How do we specify the way that we want to forecast? But there are different things that we can't capture. Number one, pricing behavior, right? So I've talked about how supply and demand, harga bond, harga input naik, people price in, but sometimes you can't capture all that, right? There could be other things yang affect firms punya pricing conditions. So how do you So if there's no one single variable or indicator that you can use, how do you go ahead, right? So this is where kita, at least at central banks, and not just Bank Negara lah, many central banks, they use surveys. So we use surveys, we go to the ground, right? We go to the ground, we talk to industries, we talk to players, we talk to producers. So kita tanya lah dia, how do you think about this? So at least it gives you some sense on a judgment basis. Okay, given the model, how would then I overlay these other factors which the model can't capture to increase forecast accuracy and robustness, right? And the second one is, model assumes, of course, in models there are frictions, but it assumes that things will work just how it's supposed to work. That's why it's called model, like and because real life. So in real life, there's a lot of frictions here. The MCO, the shortages of product, weather issues, this kind of stuff. So again, how do we take into account all of this to have a robust forecast? So we have to look at other things. So I put it here, credit card spending. So this is to gauge demand. So kalau kita nak tunggu GDP punya data, satu is lag by a month, right? Number two is that it's too macro. Kita tak boleh nampak kat mana dia punya spending, right? So we want to use a more real-time punya data to supplement the macroeconomic data to forecast. So credit card spending, hotel booking. At one point of time juga, during the pandemic, how to gauge how people spend and to what extent that lead to increase in prices. Kita tengok Google mobility punya trend. So if mobility is high, then chances that people are spending, right? So that's how central banks overlay the unaccounted aspects in models so that we can have a bit more robust forecasts and economic narratives for policy decision. Next please. Right. Okay. So the second one is this crucial for monetary policy. I'm not sure because you guys have learned this already, but the Taylor rule, right? So what it does is that it gives us a reaction function on what should central bank do and think given inflation. So of course here is very, very standardized. I check out tadi. So obviously more relevant for inflation targeter, not really us. But in some sense, if you think about it, it's quite relevant, right? So how do you set the interest rate? It's basically a function of the target itself, which is pi there, right? And then you plus a half of growth or demand, if you will, and the change of inflation itself, right? So then you get some orang kata indication where should policy rate or where should interest rate go. But I should caveat in the sense that given the uniqueness of the pandemic and the circumstances, not all central banks are following this very closely lah. So quite a lot, even the US inflation targeter have debated this quite a lot. But nevertheless, it's something useful to think about, as a guide. Obviously, policy making is a bit more complex than that, macam ada cakap tadi. So there's a lot of things to think about, but this is something that provide useful way to quantify dynamics of considerations for monetary policy, if you will. Okay. Right. Okay. So I've gone to the last part of my presentation. So this is basically I spoke a lot about MP is not really straightforward. There's a lot of things to consider. There's a lot of other things to weigh in. So here I just want to share. Sometimes when we use model, you guys run models. We run models, and we look at stats. the empirical findings, it's good to have sanity checks against reality as well, right? You know, because policy making, I mean, of course, as you guys would know, monetary policy, the decision itself affects livelihoods, it affects welfare of all people. It's very blunt, affects everybody. Pukul sama rata semua orang. So you want to have some sanity checks on how when you run something, does it make sense? Okay, so here I want to share some quite interesting empirical finding. It's called neo-Fisherian, right? So it's basically derived study from the Fisher equation. So what they found is that this neo-Fisherian is that when you raise interest rates, it leads to higher inflation instead of going down. Kan? So tadi I cakap tadi for central banks in the sense that when you raise interest rates, you spend less, the economy cools down, and then you get slow inflation. But when people run regressions, this is what they found. Higher interest rates tend to correlate with higher inflation. So the neo-Fisherians, the argument in the sense that if you want to lower interest rate, you want to lower inflation, you lower interest rates. If you want to increase inflation, well, you increase interest rates. Okay, the argument comes in because before the pandemic, post global financial crisis, this is where I think in advanced economies, inflation is very, very low, partly because the economy doesn't recover, right? So it's stuck at very low level, the policy rate, but that doesn't orang kata jumpstart the economy. So this is where the argument comes from. So I want to put a case here as well. If you think about Turkey, the president is a very much a fan of neo-Fisher hypothesis. So what they try to do is that they want to try social experiments on this. So instead of raising interest rates, they cut interest rates. But as you guys can see there, the inflation is the blue line. While cutting interest rates didn't really have that neo-Fisher effect, right? Because inflation actually went up quite a lot, 85%. The rate of inflation is 85%. Okay, and obviously it kind of affect the currency as well. USD Turkey positive means it's depreciated by about 30%. So again, the point here is that I'm not trying to say that this hypothesis is wrong, but an empirical finding may not necessarily be the right policy choice, right? If you don't consider other things as well. So this is one of the more peculiar cases where if you take it lock, stock, and barrel, or you take it on surface, that it could contribute to policy missteps. That's what we saw. That's what we've seen here for Turkey. Right? Okay, next, please. I want to shift gears. I'm talking about climate here. So before this, I've mentioned about how we think about climate affecting prices. Banjir, drought, what have you. Typically, we see rising prices temporarily because of that disruptions, those kind of stuff. But I think climate here goes beyond that. Why does it matter for monetary policy? Because it would significantly affect prices in the long run as well. So the shift from brown to green products, right? So there's bound to be that premium there, right? Through basically carbon transition lah. So that means that inflation could be permanently higher going forward, and so we can't go to that low target given this circumstances, which again is also driven by policy itself. Right? And the second part is it would have an effect on monetary policy because once, say for example, you have carbon policies, right, that favors green over brown, then the incentive for the financial institutions will be different. So that would affect monetary policy punya transmission. So if you increase interest rates, you may not necessarily see the effects that you like to see, because banks do have policies on green. Say, for example, they focus on the green, but the browns are being left out. So to reduce interest rates, okay? So people to allow firms to borrow, but if the banks do have a strict policy on green, then the brown industries may not get the financing that's needed. So that could impair the effects of monetary policy punya responses to the economy, and then some other stuff. But I guess, I mean, we're in this for the long game. There's no orang kata lending or best practices at the moment. Everybody's experimenting this. I mean, the classic case is, and we can think of, is currently Europe at the moment. So because of the war, gas prices, fuel prices in Europe goes up, and to some extent as well, that was exacerbated by the fact that because they prioritize green over brown, right? So a bias against carbon industries to some extent. They want to meet the goals faster. So if you think about it, Bali, then yeah, how do you balance that? That is the question that will remain relevant for the next decade, I would say. Again, adding complexity on how we think that monetary policy or even policy itself would work. Right. So on one hand, you want to be carbon free, but would people, especially people in this room as well, will you be willing to pay higher prices for products because of that thing? Well, depends again. So not everyone is for that, right? So, and as I said tadi, in the case of Europe, I mean, it can be kind of a big problem juga lah. Increase significantly cost of living and hardship, right? Okay, next. And the last slide is, so when we think about monetary policy, I've said before, monetary policy is not the solution for everything. Monetary policy can potentially tackle inflation, but it can't help with cost of living. Contohnya, right? Monetary policy is a blunt tool. It affects everyone, every one of us. So a lot of people have been asking, like, yeah, well, you said economy is everyone said economy is recovering, but some people are still in hardship. Yeah, that's precisely the problem, because overall, on average, the economy is okay, but can't say it for everyone, right? So the more vulnerable groups, lower income groups, potentially may not be having that welfare growth as much as others. So when you start raising interest rates, that is sort of like a trade-offs to that pace, right? So if it's not a panacea, you need other things as well. So when we think about welfare, this is where fiscal policy remains important. The policy set by the government. So if you want to, contoh, for example, if you want to rationalize subsidies, right? You want to make sure that you do have welfare policies in place so that people are not affected by the higher inflation and the fact that monetary policy can potentially have to react to those kind of responses. And of course, you need as well sound balance of payments policies as well. So we're talking about exchange rate policies, talking about trade policies that will help to mitigate some of the caveats of monetary policy. And also equally important is the macroprudential measures. So this measures talking about basically primarily in the financial sector, but very targeted one. So contoh, for example, when you have high household debt, yes, one can use monetary policy, naikkan interest rates so that people are discouraged from borrowing more. But knowing that it's not across the board, then you don't want to use monetary policy, kan? You don't want to use interest rate. You want to use something else. So, say, for example, in 2013, 2014, we have housing minimum bubble. Of course, the interest rate was raised juga because the demand condition is good. But really, to tackle that problem, the use was the household responsibility guidelines. So it's a macroprudential targeting people who speculate. or people who have the ability to do so, right? Rather than whack everyone else by just raising interest rates. So that's how, if you think about it, central banks have moved away from just using monetary policy, right, for price stability and macroeconomic stability, to also think about complementary policies that you have, that one has in disposal to uh, you know uh, manage the uh, economic shocks or frictions that we see in the economy. And similarly as well, ringgit depreciate. Of course, there were some people saying like, why don't just raise interest rates? Well, you can do that, right? But satu is may not do much because it's not about ringgit, it's about dollar. Number two is that then you're gonna one has to think about, well, what is the welfare effect to the rest of the other people who probably do not be affected as much with the weaker exchange rate. If, say, for example, they don't travel abroad or they don't consume imported goods, so they're gonna go with the higher interest rates. One will feel the effect as well. So okay, that's what I had on my deck at the moment. I'll be happy to open for questions or discussions or whatever. Hope that's
Thank
okay,
you.
Dr. Siti.
Yeah, it's okay. Thank you, Mr. Ahmad. So, any questions from the participant, from our students? For your information, Mr. Ahmad, we have students from Mathematics with Economics from year 1 until final year. And then we also have the third year students who are going to do their final year project next semester. I guess I expect a number of questions from this group, from the third year students. So anyone, please? Someone in the group, anyone? By the way, I would like to ask one thing, Mr. Ahmad, about the tactical decisions. Decision just now. Tactical decision on timing of policy adjustment.
Mhm.
I don't really understand. What does it mean by the tactical decisions?
Okay, so there's two parts of it, Doctor. So satu is that, of course, monetary policy ni, it would have a bearing juga on how financial markets akan react to that kind of thing. If it's a surprise that you're going to get, in fact, that you need to manage through other ways. Okay, contohnya lah, stock market jatuh, banyak, bond market yields naik. So you're going to do that as well, right? So it has to be managed in a tactical manner, in the sense that you shouldn't surprise market. That's number one. Number two is that even though you have a case where you need to do monetary policy when you move, or you need to adjust interest rates, but there are other things going on. Contohnya macam kalau ada election ke, ada problem ke, so you don't want to exacerbate that. So this is where I think the important aspect of monetary policy is the communication itself, right? So the forward guidance, to give what basically to gauge what people can expect and what people can understand from the move itself. So that's what we mean by tactical lah. So that beyond the economic and financial considerations.
So as I can see from there just now, all of the parameters that have been presented are all economic factors. But one thing, can we say that political changes in the country give some sort of effect to the policy or the policy adjustment, something like that?
Not directly, but I suppose it's in the sense that that's more coming from reputational punya angle, in the sense that we don't want to be. I mean, of course, central banks in the world, not just us, like an elections pretty much running throughout the world, they want to be seen neutral and not be orang kata beholden to certain group of parties or whatever. So if you notice across time, histories and whatnot, I mean, typically central banks would refrain themselves from making comments or adjusting something when political political circumstances are very much heightened. in a way, because kita tak nak aggravate the sentiments and the basically affecting our credibility as a neutral party. Yeah, but from the political perspective, in a sense that should the political reality changes and would have bearing on certain policies, then we will take that into consideration as well. Kan? Contoh, if you we've seen this happening dekat other countries as well, when you get a new party that's ruling, basic scrap hold the other policies, then that would significantly change the economic and financial considerations for monetary policy. So that has to be taken into account as well. But fortunately for us, I think at least the recent ones, there is that continuity in the policies that the government is doing. So in that sense, I think it's a positive one for us, at least.
And then one more thing about the inflation, because I can see that you keep on try to relate the inflations with the monetary policy and everything. And maybe for our student, for the undergraduate students, when if they are interested to do their studies on inflation, can you suggest any small topics that is relevant to their level as undergraduate students?
One topic I think which is good for undergraduates, I think, is really how do you differentiate inflation and cost of living? Because I think for us as well, kita punya publication, we've been going on to stress to public stakeholders, political masters, if you will, is that those things are related, no, but they're not the same. Okay. Macam I stress tadi, when we talk about inflation, we're not talking about harga barang naik. No, harga barang mesti naik. Stat student here, when you look at the price level, it is basically upper sloping. You can't get. I mean, you can get lah, Dato, but you're gonna get Japan lah. 20 years of deflation and no growth. Kan? So price level memang akan naik. I mean, this is obviously it's a concept that people very hard people to grapple lah. We don't like high prices. We don't like to pay more. But this is the only way, right? If you think about it. But when we talk about inflation, it is really the speed and the magnitude of changes. Macam I tunjuk tadi, Turkey 88%. We don't want that. We want about 2 to 3% maybe. Okay? Because wage growth is about 5 to 6%. So as long as your wage growth or income growth, it's matching or at least supersede higher than the inflation, we're good. At least on paper lah. Okay. But the cost of living too, I want to stress, that's a good one because not everything through CPI kita boleh capture. So kita kata CPI sekarang about 4%, kan? 4%, core inflation tadi, about 4%. Some people say on the ground, say, well, that's not what how much I pay. Harga barang naik 10%, 30%. Iyalah, betul lah. Memanglah harga barang naik sampai 30%. Kan? Tapi, that's why inflation itself is a good is not a good barometer for cost of living, but it is a start. It is a start. Kan? So I don't know. Maybe that's something that's worth exploring with students because to me personally, I rasa benda ni touches kita directly, kan? And it's something that I must say lah, not just in this country lah, basically throughout the world lah sekarang tau. I mean, even advanced economies, they've been grappling with inflation. They have never had inflation above 2% for the last 10 years, and suddenly inflation is about 9% in the US, and people are complaining about cost of living and whatever. But one difference that I personally saw, in the sense that over there, they don't conflate between the two. So they understand, yeah, inflation is high, but my cost of living is something else. So for example, if I live in urban areas, obviously I would pay more than I'm staying in, say, rural areas, something like that. But that's something I think, at least from our part lah, Negara, we want to do a bit more outreach. And we do hope that your university can help us with that as well. At least from a student's level, the concept really matters here. So monetary policy, interest rate is to tackle inflation, but it can never tackle cost of living macam I cakap tadi lah. It needs other things, especially fiscal policies. That's where social protection, those kind of stuff, that's where is orang kata the real deal lah when dealing with cost of living. Kan? Of course, the other one is the income lah. keep complaining about high costs, but income kita tak naik, minimum wage pun orang jadi hoo-ha, then we can't solve anything.
Then one example, Mr. Ahmad, when let's say when the government give a special raise for the public servant,
Mm.
and then it kinds of we can see that the price started to increase and everything. Could you please comment on that?
Naturally, it would be orang kata that would be the circumstances. But again, Doc, that's why I cakap tadi, the uncertainty is in pricing behavior. Because if you think about it logically, right, over time, if there's no demand, there's no way firms and businesses boleh pass on the cost, naik harga. It just be unsustainable, kan? Tapi kalau gaji naik, harga barang naik, tapi people still consume, as what we've seen now. Then you can't really argue that you're affected. Sangat. I mean, at least the ones can spend. So as long as so the point here, the issue is how do you then slow down the ability to spend? Kan? You know, like you don't macam cakap tadi lah, you don't want to end up macam kat US. Yeah, the economy recovers, but you also get 10% inflation. So at the end of the day, it's like, you know, whether that's okay for people lah. People still complain as well, right? So here in Malaysia, maybe recovery is a bit slower, a bit more gradual. But on the positive side, maybe inflation not that bad. Kan? So yeah. I mean, that's orang kata tak ada lah. You can't really choose between the two, but I would say that it's easier to manage if prices don't grow slower lah than allow the economy to go overheating, and then you need to manage later. Lagi susah lah. Lagi banyak orang kata cost, if you will.
Yeah, understood. Okay, any questions from the student? At least one or two questions? Yuvin, Hafiz? I'm calling up names already. Anyone?
Doctor, maybe I can ask.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yes, please.
Mr. Ahmad.
Introduce yourself, please. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Chizen. I'm just graduate from the ME. So I have a question that Malaysia have used a lot of subsidy for like essential food, fuel, and energy. So is it BNM always consider these subsidies and also OPR to control the inflation? I mean subsidy and OPR. When we use more subsidy, the inflation may be slowing down. Then we can maybe lower down our OPR as well. How you all consider these two things? Because subsidy in Malaysia is quite important, right? When we see a lot of overseas like Thailand and Singapore come to Malaysia to get the petrol subsidy, right?
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah. What's your point of view on how really BNM cooperate with the governments on this subsidy and OPR?
Okay. So let me touch on subsidies first. Subsidies at its core is not really to address overall inflation, okay? Because it affects relative prices. Relative prices means that price of certain goods lah or services. Contoh macam minyak. So of course it can affect other things as well. So when you have subsidies, harga minyak rendah, then of course, you know, that would mitigate increases in other prices as well. But it will come with a cost lah, the fiscal cost, whether the government can take it or not, right? So that's number one. From the OPR perspective, we're not managing harga barang. Kita manage harga untuk the overall economy. So macam I cakap tadi, you can manage harga setengah barang, but if there's demand, right, people are spending, then you're gonna get people raising prices as well. Basically, the supply and demand lah. Because if people demanding that product banyak, supply tak keep up with it, the prices will go up naturally juga, even without subsidies or even without anything. So the role of central banks, when we think about monetary policy, is really to manage that thing. That could happen with or without subsidies. See, in our case, because subsidies are there were some arguments yang cakap that dia akan distort spending behavior. Because harga minyak murah, So semua orang nak pergi driving, semua orang nak berjalan semua kan. Compare dengan say sekarang kat negara lain, harga minyak tinggi, people will spend a bit more prudently, contohnya. Contoh macam harga ayam kan. So what we saw in Singapore, in a sense, at least in Thailand as well, is that they've moved to other sort of meat. Yeah, maybe. So this is what we call substitution effect in spending behavior. So harga ayam naik, you tak semestinya makan ayam je. You beli benda lain kan. Tapi of course, whether it's applicable kat kita, tak lah. Perhaps tak. Kan? Because the other proteins are also expensive as well. So in reality, food cannot be substituted, right? But I guess for us, where I'm coming from in the sense that the subsidies, if it's not targeted, this is where it can create distortions in terms of consumption. When that happens, almost always, that economy will, people will be spending, the economy will be growing, and that's where monetary policy needs to manage the demand side of it, rather than the supply. So subsidies manage the supply side of it, right? Prices go down of specific items, but it doesn't address the inflation itself. As you guys will have seen, you guys pernah dengar kan yang jihad forum komiti sebelum ni kan, jihad menenangi inflasi. So saya selalu attend juga benda tu dengan bos saya. We were there. So you see a lot of controls there, but do you see inflation going down? Not necessarily. Okay, the overall inflation tak membantu. It helps necessity food, but again, the point is that if there is that demand, then monetary policy has to come. So inflation naik because of demand, whether you ada subsidy ke tak, monetary policy have to come in. Tapi kalau I agree with you in the sense that if demand is not there, economy is still weak, people not spending, then because of the war, harga barang naik because of supply shortages or whatever, then subsidies is a good policies to mitigate that. And in fact, in European countries, they actually give subsidies, targeted ones lah, obviously. Contoh macam kat UK, they subsidize the electricity prices because that's beyond everybody's control kan. It's a war, the shortages, so they want to help with that, right? But if it's demand issue, right? I should put it on the table here in the sense that the monetary policy is always the best way to deal with it. Hope I answer your question, Tadi.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Do we have any other questions from other students? Anyone? You can raise your hand. Use the emoji. Anyone? Any other questions or on chat? Okay, I think that's all for today, Mr. Ahmad. So I would like to thank you. Terima kasih banyak-banyak kerana sudi memberikan sesi perkongsian ini dengan para pelajar ME. Sebenarnya ada juga pensyarah ME juga di dalam ni. So before we ended the session, could you please all of you, on your camera so that Yuwin take charge on the photo, ambil gambar. So can we take pictures, everyone? Okay, on camera, please. All right, okay, take your time on the camera. Nak sikat rambut dulu ke? Nak pakai lawa-lawa dulu ke? Actually, Encik Ahmad, this week they're having their semester break.
I see.
So most of them are at home. Okay, thank you, Dr. Chi. Okay, this is Dr. Chi. Let me wait.
Thank you, Dr. Siti.
Yeah, I need to move you to stage. Yeah. Okay, this is Dr. Chi, Encik Ahmad, our Timbalan Dekan Hal Ehwal Pelajar. Okay, our Deputy Dean.
Thank you, Encik Ahmad, for giving a very constructive lecture to our students.
Yeah,
thank you.
Happy to do so.
Yeah. Okay, now, so who's handling the photo ni? Yuwin? Are you the one? I don't know how to. Yuwin? Let me check.
Doctor, him is handling the.
Okay, so can they change the? Can we see all the students there? No, right? We need to take page by page, isn't it?
I think he's using the laptop. Hold on, Doctor. I'll ask him.
Okay, so could you please say next, so that everybody can stay put.
Him, can you see the whole screen? Everyone in the meet.
Yes, I can see. Actually, I can see everyone in my whole screen, but just because not everyone is turned on the camera, so I think one page is more.
Yeah, can we choose the one those who turn on the camera?
Yes,
Yeah,
doctor.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, minta semua on camera sekarang ya. Thank you. Okay, him, when you are taking the photo, you count.
Okay, everyone, please be ready. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, please remain your positions and go into the next page. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, once again, 1, 2, 3. Okay, please down. Please down. In 1, 2, 3. Okay, please remain your positions. Okay, I'm going to the next page and 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Doctor, mic is off, Doctor.
Okay, thank you him. Thank you Yuvin. Okay, thank you again Mr. Ahmad. Hopefully we can see you again next year, but this time secara fizikal kan? Boleh ke tu Cik Ahmad? Cik Ahmad kan busy kan? InsyaAllah. Okay, hopefully kita akan ada event next year yang mana kita boleh jemput Cik Ahmad lah, special. Okay, thank you Dr. Chi. Thank you everyone. Take care and have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Encik Ahmad. Thank you, Dr. Sidi. Thank you to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. G. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you Dr. Chi.
Yeah. Okay.